A little over a few months ago, I noticed a change in my girlfriend, Charlotte. To go back before that, we met a few years ago when we were both working at the same crappy part-time job. This is important, because long before we started dating, I knew this was a woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. I promise I wasn't some creepy stalker about it. I was perfectly happy being friends with her. At first, we only saw each other at work. A crappy pizza joint that only the worst people in the city seemed to visit. And every day when I got to work, she was there with a smile and a joke. Sometimes a snack to share. The more time I spent with her, the more I wanted to become someone she could be proud of. At first, we really only saw each other at work. Then I started picking her up to go to the mall together. We would get coffee or dinner once a week. And before long, we were dating. I worked hard at that job. And I've worked hard at every job I've had since I met her. She really makes me a better person, and that's not just a tangent about how much I love her. She's such a wonderful person that everyone around her just kind of improves by default. I say that because I need you to know it for what I'm about to tell you next. A while back, my girlfriend of 2 years at that point, I've known her for 4.5 now, came home from a camping trip and started acting differently. At first it was little stuff. She totally lost her appetite for a while and didn't seem to want to eat anything. We assumed it was a stomach bug or stress from work, and she tried to dial it back to get more rest. At first that seemed to be what she needed. Her appetite came back for a while and she even seemed better than before. Then she couldn't sleep at night. It started slowly, with her staying up on her phone for a few minutes longer than usual. Then an hour, and I was waking up at 4 in the morning to find her pacing back and forth in the hallway of our apartment. While that was going on, remember, all of this developed over the last 6 months or so. She seemed to get more spaced out and daydreaming a lot. I would come home and find her staring out the window. When I would ask what she was looking at, she would just smile and point at something I couldn't seem to see. Other times I would wake up in the middle of the night to find her staring at a wall, or just standing in a doorway not doing anything. Every time I talked to her about it, she promised me it was nothing, or that she would go see her doctor if it went on. I wanted to believe her as much as I wanted it to be nothing. After that, she started going out into the woods alone at night. It's not a big forest, maybe a 1/4 acre or so, and spread out across a few people's backyards. At first, I didn't really think much of it. Like everything else, it started small and escalated. She would go out for a quick 20-minute walk right at sunset. Then it was 30 minutes, then 45, then an hour. Before very long, I would be long asleep before I felt her creeping into bed next to me. Other than that, her behavior didn't change. Despite hardly eating or sleeping, she was still her kind and sweet self during the day. She was loving, thoughtful, and just as intelligent as ever. She also didn't seem to be going through a lot of physical changes. A little weight loss, which worried me, but she swore she felt okay. That's really why I didn't think about it too much. She wasn't acting different from her usual self during the day, and if all she was battling was insomnia and nausea, then she could cope how she needed to. I think a part of me was worried about stressing her out even more by bothering her about all the too much. So I sat by and waited. That was foolish of me, in hindsight. But then again, we always tried to assume the best about each other. Then it got a lot harder to ignore. When I would kiss her in the morning, I could taste iron. Not overwhelmingly, but as if she'd had blood in her mouth a few hours before and rinsed her mouth out. And I don't mean blood from flossing. I mean I could taste it in her mouth, as if her mouth had been full of blood just a few hours prior. I started finding packages in the trash for roast egg. Sure, she could have been cooking them without me knowing somehow, but there were so many of them. I couldn't understand how she was eating that much steak in a week, especially after her problems with nausea. That was when I finally started asking questions, but I was too afraid to press very hard. Instead, I kept pretending everything was normal. We kept going about our new routine, pretending nothing was wrong, until the neighborhood pets started going missing. I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't care if she spent another mortgage on steak or even hunted down squirrels and whatnot, as long as that was making her happy. But she couldn't hurt people's precious pets. That wasn't like her, and it wasn't something I could let my girlfriend get away with either. I basically had no evidence it was her, except the shift in her behavior at night and the occasional episode of spacing out. But something deep inside me knew. I waited up for her a few nights ago when she went on one of her nighttime strolls. When she got back, around 4 in the morning, she had blood around her mouth. The strangest part, though, was that she looked different. Her eyes were wider, more oval-shaped than they're supposed to be. Her pupils were almost gray instead of black. I sat her down on the couch and asked what was going on. Slowly her features seemed to shift back to normal, and as they did her eyes welled up with tears. I pulled her into my arms, and she cried while she told me what had been happening. She told me something happened after the camping trip. At least to the best of her knowledge, that's when the change occurred. She said it started pretty much the way I saw it for her now. She couldn't sleep, started eating a lot less. Then the craving started. All she wanted was steak. And at first she was cooking it. Then she realized she wanted to eat it raw, and started doing that. Then one night on her walks, she saw a wounded rabbit. It seemed like somebody's dog or cat had bit it and done fatal damage, but not been able to eat it. She ate the rabbit, and she said it was the most exhilarating, perfect experience she'd ever had. She found that she wasn't tired during the day either when she ate the little animals in the forest. She could go a whole day without needing to eat as much. Just snacks here and there, as long as she was eating the occasional small animal from her nightly walks. But then she found that she needed more and more animals to feel okay. She couldn't hunt enough rabbits or squirrels in a night. She felt sick and sluggish all day. She told me it didn't even feel like a conscious thought for her. In the same way that I would walk to the fridge when I'm hungry, she would head out into the woods each night. All she knew was that there was something that could make her feel better, amidst all these weird changes she was going through. So she kept hunting, trying not to overdo it. She would only kill and eat exactly as much as she needed. That was where the steak came in. It was the only thing other than raw living animals that she could eat and get any sense of fullness from. But eventually, the steak stopped doing it for her, and she was worried about overhunting the woods behind our house. She stopped hunting for almost a week. She said she was trying to let the local wildlife recover, but she was starving. One night, during her fasting period, she got desperate and ate a dog that had attacked a 2-year-old the year before. She's always trying to do the right thing, even in a moral gray area. But that also became too little food very quickly. She needed more food. Larger prey, so to speak. Again, it wasn't that she wanted to. The survival instinct seemed to kick in and take over. She read an article about a man who attacked a child and was let out of prison. He only lived a few miles from us. He was on the registry now, so it's public information. She said it wasn't hard to find him. She said he made the perfect meal. According to her, humans are perfect because she doesn't need to eat as often. She said most nights she can walk through the woods, eating only the occasional small animal. Then on nights when she's extra hungry and she's had the opportunity to prepare in advance, she looks for what she considers to be a deserving victim, and she goes after them. Dinner and community service all at the same time. That's my joke, not hers. She sobbed as she told me all of this. Said she hated herself for it, but she couldn't help it. She doesn't want to be like this anymore. She wants nothing more than to live normally. Go back to the way things were before whatever it was that changed her. She was telling the truth. Say what you want. But I know this woman, and I know when she's lying. She was being honest with me, and it shattered my heart to see her so sad. I told her I would help her look for a solution, some kind of cure for whatever was wrong, and that's what I've been doing. I've discovered the more she hunts and kills at night, the more she transforms at night. I don't know if it's a direct result of the hunting, killing, and eating, or if it's just that the changes are occurring over time, but I plan on figuring it out. She always looks like her usual sweet self when we wake up in the morning, but now by the time I go to sleep her skin has turned gray. Her eyes are huge and dark, and her fingers are long and gray. She's starting to grow claws too, and now I can only imagine what the next stage in her transformation will be. I've been looking online for someone who can help. Obviously it's hard to find someone who can deal with a problem like this. Someone online suggested I find a shaman, so that's what I'm going to do. I've been looking at various people's websites all morning, trying to find one that doesn't seem like a total scam. I found a few in around my city. Try Googling shamans near me, you'll be surprised by how many results you get. Now I just need to find one we can trust. It's been a few days, and we met with the shaman I found. I actually met with all 5 of them on my own first, and found the one I trusted the most. Then I took Charlotte to meet with them together. The shaman, a much older woman named Millie, sat with us for a long time, asking questions about everything that had been going on and for how long. We met in her home, a cute little multi-story townhouse in the city that was full of all sorts of fascinating things. The mantle, and the room the 3 of us sat in, was quite literally overflowing with picture frames. Something told me the best gift you could possibly give Millie was a picture frame, and maybe a gift card to a store that sells picture frames. There were old black and white photos of her when she was young and gorgeous with a whole host of people. Some of the people appeared in the photos a lot, some of them only once or twice. But it was clear that everyone on the mantle was very near and dear to Howard. The sitting room was also packed with various pieces of furniture that seemed linked to each other only by the fond memories they must have held for Millie, as every piece of furniture in that room was completely unique. There was a French-style fainting couch at the edge of the room, a large plush leather couch, a rocking chair that looked as if it may have been hand-carved, and a delicate pink love seat that Millie sat on. Charlotte and I took the large brown leather couch, and I let my eyes wander around the room as Millie and Charlotte talked. Charlotte recounted the story about her camping trip as Millie listened intently. Millie seemed to catch something we didn't, as I still have no idea how the camping trip could have started all this. Charlotte, they were hiking through Appalachia. I camped one night on the outskirts of an old cemetery. Millie found that particularly interesting and asked, "Did you do anything y'all shouldn't have when you passed by the burial grounds?" Said something rude about one of the deceased. Walked on hallowed ground without paying respects. Even spitting on a gravestone could do it. Charlotte looked horrified. No, we would never. Everyone in the group is a history buff. We just wanted to see the old cemetery. My friend Megan wanted to research some of the names after to see if we could learn anything about them. And we camped about a mile from there and went on our way. Millie nodded, her weathered face looking tense. I'm not trying to accuse you of anything, sweetheart. Sometimes evil spirits get invited in by mistake. Sometimes they try to take over when they see someone they think is weak enough. And I'm just not sure that yours fits either of those options. I grabbed Charlotte's hand and leaned forward. So what does that mean? And what do we do? Can we get rid of it? Charlotte didn't do anything wrong. She would never hurt someone on purpose. And she's still working really hard not to hurt anyone. We had told Millie about the animals, the dog, but I had asked Charlotte not to talk about the people. I know she's only doing what she has to. She knows that too, that a stranger might not understand. Even so, I think Millie knew we were holding back information. Millie eyed me carefully before saying, "It seems to me that a spirit has latched onto her. It can't fully take control because she won't let it act out the worst of its desires. If she's been able to stay contained to mostly small animals, and she's being careful not to be too greedy, the spirit won't be able to take over. But if she lets the spirit do whatever it wants, then you have a problem." Dear, I did my best to keep my face a mask of calm as I asked, "What if she did hurt a person? Would it be too late?" Millie pursed her lips. "It's only too late once she no longer wants the spirit to leave. As long as Charlotte keeps fighting, you have a chance to help her. But when she gives up, it's all over." Charlotte squeezed my hand as she said, "I still want it to leave. I'm willing to do what it takes to get rid of it." Millie smiled. "They're good people, both of you. I trust you'll do the right thing." She turned to look at me directly. "I'll tell you what you'll have to do. But young man, it's your responsibility to be there for her through what comes next. You both have to be strong. I'll have to starve the spirit." I glanced over at Charlotte nervously. She looked as brave as ever, and I tried to find the same bravery inside of myself. But I was terrified. What if getting rid of this spirit killed Charlotte? Charlotte wasn't even looking at me. She fixed a resolute gaze on Millie. "Tell me how." Millie explained that it was really quite simple. All we would have to do was not let Charlotte hunt until it starved the spirit out. She could still eat people food. Although Millie said the only thing she's allowed to eat is fruits and vegetables. Meat has to be cooked. She said Charlotte will probably go through periods of being really hungry and able to eat just fine. Then there will be periods where she won't eat at all unless we allow her to hunt. Those are the moments where I have to be most cautious. Millie said I'll experience as much temptation as Charlotte does when I have to watch her suffer. Every day that goes by gets harder than the last. At first I thought I could handle it. Charlotte has always been a tough girl. But watching her go through this has been a nightmare. I've been cooking dinner for the two of us every night. Everything is fully cooked. And I've been trying to make sure she's eating as many nutrient-dense foods as possible too. I know she's not eating as much as she should be. But every night, when we sit down to dinner, she gives me this big trembling smile. And I can tell she's eating as much as she can. I wake up every morning to see her looking tired and drawn. She tries to stay inside at night so she can avoid temptation. Which means now wake up most nights to a creature that bears a vague resemblance to my girlfriend, pacing at the foot of our bed. When my alarm goes off around 6, I wake up again to see her pale, almost haggard face smiling next to me. I don't know how she does it. Despite everything she's going through, she's still so happy and sweet. She sits next to me while I make dinner, chatting and reminding me how grateful she is for everything I'm doing for her. I keep reminding her it's for us. She's my future, so of course I'm going to take care of her. Lately she's been asking me to stay awake at night, just for a few hours, because the cravings have been so strong. I called Millie again and asked her if this is normal, and she said it takes a long time to dislodge an evil spirit like this. She also reassured me that it's very clear that Charlotte isn't allowing the spirit to take over, which gives her a much better chance of being able to get rid of it. I don't know how much longer I can watch her suffer like this, though. She seems to be growing weaker every day, and I'm afraid she'll die before the evil spirit leaves. Charlotte is sick. Really sick. She's been tossing and turning in bed with a fever for the last few days. I'm worried this is going to kill her. I'm going out tonight to find her something to eat. I'll make sure it's someone deserving. But I can't risk losing the love of my life. I would rather see everyone else fall at her hands than watch her die like this. She doesn't deserve that, and I don't think I do either. A few nights ago I went camping with my cousin Theo and our friend Milani. The three of us are all travel bloggers or journalists freelance. Theo and Milani work for the same magazine, and a lot of what we do is just going to various locations together, then writing about whatever aspect of it our readers are interested in. Theo does all nature stuff, hiking, camping, survivalist stuff. Remind me to tell you about our trip through Appalachia last year. Yikes. Anyway, Theo wanted to branch out of the mountains and try an excursion in the desert, near Navajo territory. We found a remote camping spot, set up tents, and started a campfire. Lalani has been reading a lot about protective rituals. We run into a lot of weird stuff. What can I say, and felt really confident about some advice she got. So as we set up camp, she burned some white sage and Palo Santo in the fire, then mixed the ashes with salt and spread it out in a rough circle around our campsite. The three of us laughed about it as she did, not really believing it would do much, except Alani, but willing to waste the time if nothing else. It was well after dark when I offered to run back to the car to grab the food we had brought for dinner. The car was parked a ways off from our campsite, and I left Theo and Milani chatting and laughing by the fire, feeling comfortable in the warm desert night. Just as I locked the car and started making my way back to the fire, I heard Theo shouting my name from somewhere off in the desert. I yelled back, asking what he wanted, and heard him respond, this time his voice coming from the direction of our campfire. Don't say anything else. Get back to the fire as fast as you can. And behind me, closer to the car, I heard Lalani's voice calling softly for me to come back. I felt cold dripping down my spine and broke into a run. I got to the fire just in time to hear my own voice calling out for Theo and Lalani to join me in the desert on the opposite side of the fire. I yelled out that it wasn't me, and for them to stay where they were, and jumped across the threshold of salt and ash. Just as I did, I heard my own name being called again. I'm still cold thinking about it. My own name being said in my own voice, followed by deep throaty laughter. Theo, Nilani, and I stared at each other in horror and huddled closer to the fire as Theo threw more sage onto the fire, scooping white ash onto his wood-chopping axe. A voice hissed derisively from the darkness as a pale face came into view. It was clearly human but looked all wrong. The face was stretched and thin in all the wrong places, while wrinkled and leathery as if it had been stretched out and pressed back into place over and over. The body was covered in different animal furs and skins, as well as more than one variety of leather, most of which looked disturbingly human. The creature smiled and crouched a few feet away from the ring of ash. It grabbed a stick and leaned forward, an amused look in its eyes as if about to tell a joke, then pushed the ash with the stick and said, oh no, the border is broken. Its voice was amused and light, as though simply making a joke amongst friends. I looked at Theo and Lalani, who were both as deadly pale as I felt. Theo stepped forward and brandished the ash-covered axe. The creature grimaced and dropped the stick, putting its hands up in surrender and sitting back on its haunches. I grabbed more ash and salt and wedged the boundary line. The four of us stood there in a silent standoff. Theo, Lalani, and I silent and horrified, while the creature sat cross-legged and smiled as if it was spending a relaxing night with friends. It gestured to the cooler bag full of food and said, aren't you going to eat? Please, don't allow me to impose. I looked back at Theo and Leilani again and cleared my throat. What are you? The creature laughed and spoke back first in what I assume must be its own voice, changing slowly between its voice, my own voice, Theo's, and Leilani's as it talked. O child, I am older than the trees growing around your camp, older than the sage in your fire. I am sharper than the blade of your axe and stronger than the ironwood trees you burn in your fire. I am only one of my kind, but I was one of the first and expect I will be one of the last. Leilani took the bag from my hands and opened it, moving purposefully as if the creature wasn't watching us intently, and began pulling out food to heat over the fire. Theo leaned down and handed me my sketchbook, nodding for me to sit by the fire with a silent message. Draw while you can, and keep the sage at hand. I sat down, trying not to shake as I slowly began to sketch, while Theo knelt across from the thing, axe still clutched firmly in hand. It leaned forward, letting the firelight dance across its face and glow in its eyes, but maintaining a respectful distance from our boundary lines. It's been a long time since my portrait was taken. What a lovely group for me to find myself in company with. Leilani glanced over, looking at the thing as if it were simply an unwelcome guest overstating his welcome, and gestured at it absently with a kebab. What do you want? The creature smiled again, reminding me jarringly of my grandfather. Not that my grandfather was a nightmarish voice-stealing creature. Something about it seemed almost paternal, as if he really was just chilling by the fire with his grandkids. Not your food if that's what you're asking me. I find far better nourishment in other ways. I looked up from my sketch, trying to keep a casual expression, and looked at Theo and Leilani out of the corner of my eyes to see their stony expressions. None of us asked for clarification and the creature offered none, instead watching the three of us silently, as Leilani finished cooking its side, and stood up like it was stretching, and walked slow circles around our campsite. Pay no mind to me. I had no intention of ruining your night. I merely liked to listen. We sat in silence for a while, and slowly resumed a stilted conversation, trying to pretend that nothing was wrong, discussing the day, our plans for the next leg of our journey, and finally choosing to talk about the scenery. Occasionally one of our voices would chime in from the darkness with a comment or a suggestion that we all go for a walk, and we would sit in silence as the ancient being would chuckle at its own jokes. We spent the entire night that way, the three of us awake and on edge, a shifting voice in the darkness beyond our campsite beckoning for us to join it. Late in the night, it rejoined the firelight with a friendly smile that made my blood run cold. It said, "Don't young people like to tell stories anymore? Whatever happened to the old legends of the stars and gods?" Theo, his specialty being storytelling, perked up at this, but a warning hand on his arm from Leilani kept him silent. I spoke up instead. "I'm sure you have stories of your own, don't you? You must know more about the old legends than any of us." It smiled, like I had said something wonderful, and gestured to the three of us. "How about this? Each of you tells a story, a legend of any kind. If you entertain me, I'll tell my own story, then I'll leave you in the morning. But on the sole condition that you never return here again. These are my lands, and while the company has been pleasant this evening, I rarely find myself in such a generous mood." We stared at each other, and finally Leilani spoke. "You just want to hear campfire stories. That's all we have to do for you to guarantee we'll leave here alive?" The creature nodded, skin pulling back from its face in a wide smile, and waited. The three of us silently agreed, and Theo nodded for me to take the lead. I looked down at the sketchbook in my hand and smiled. "Would you like to hear an illustrated story?" The creature looked hungrily at my sketchbook, and I opened it with a shiver, going through the pages one by one and telling the stories of the things we've encountered. Theo and Leilani chimed in occasionally, and we relaxed into the stories as though simply recounting our adventures to a curious stranger. I found myself enjoying the stories more than I had expected. While he was terrifying, the creature was also a surprisingly good listener. He would nod and laugh, ask questions with genuine curiosity, and sat back with a smile when I closed the book. Oh yes, I chose the right fire tonight. It turned expectant eyes on Theo and Leilani, and Theo leapt into his favorite legend about the marriage of the Norse goddess Freya. He had always loved the Nordic legends, since we were kids, and he told it the same way he had told me stories as children. Every character had a voice of their own which seemed to delight the creature to no end, and he waved his hands in the air with animated excitement. The creature listened intently, chuckling occasionally and repeating sentences back in Theo's voice when it found them particularly amusing. It especially seemed to enjoy mimicking the strange voices Theo would do for each character. I felt a shiver watching them interact. In another world I could imagine this being one of Theo's friends. It was hard to see the thing in front of us as anything other than a monster, but the storytelling seemed to be bringing out its human side. Theo wrapped up the story with a satisfied smile, and the creature turned to Leilani, who looked at us with a smile that made my bones feel brittle with anxiety. She had something planned, and I had the sinking feeling I wasn't going at all. She began. It was a dark night, darker than this one, and a young man was walking home late on a deserted road. His route took him past a cemetery, and as he walked past the gates, he got the creeping feeling he was being followed. After a few steps he heard a bump from behind him. Too afraid to look, he walked faster, but the noise continued getting louder. Bump, scrape, bump, scrape. On and on, closing the distance. He finally turned around to see a coffin barely illuminated by a streetle twine standing on end bumping down the street after him. He started running for his life, but the coffin only followed faster. Bump, scrape, bump, scrape. Finally, he got to his home and ran to his tools where he had an axe. He threw it at the coffin, but that did nothing to stop it. He ran into the house, and the coffin followed him up the porch, breaking down the front door after him. He ran up the stairs and grabbed his shotgun, firing at the coffin as it came through the doorway. But the now splintered coffin only continued to approach. In desperation, he ran into his bathroom and began to hurl items at the coffin. The last item he threw was a bottle of cough syrup. It shattered against the coffin, drenching it in cough syrup. The coffin stopped. I looked over at Theo with horror and saw him watching Leilani with absolute pride and adoration. Of course, in a life-or-death situation, she would tell a pun. The creature had its head slightly bent, repeating the last part of Leilani's story in her voice, then its own. After a moment, it looked up with a completely serious expression. Cough syrup. Stop the coffin. Leilani nodded, smiling broadly. The creature burst into laughter, a sound of such pure mirth that for a moment I felt like I could truly see the human face that had once been there. The creature leaned back, still grinning, and looked at each of us in turn. I suppose you have fulfilled your end of the deal. I shall fulfill mine. Theo added another bundle of sticks to the fire, and Leilani put on a pot of water to boil, nodding for me to grab tea and our cups out of the pack. The creature watched patiently, then nodded to the tea. Before I began, may I expect the hospitality could be extended to me? Surprised, and Leilani shrugged, and I handed her a fourth cup. When the tea was ready, I stood up and placed the cup outside the circle of ash. The creature tapped it gently with a long bony finger and sighed. My story begins long before any of the stories you three have told tonight. It begins when animals roam the earth that have not existed for many seasons. I was a young man, a hunter and a skilled one, but try as I might, I could do nothing to elevate my status among my people, and neither the kills I brought home or the danger I stopped. It seemed that my position remained one of absolute mediocrity. There was little room for me to grow among my own people, so I left home, promising to return when I had achieved greatness, and only then. My goal was always to return to a place of high standing, my rightful place. He paused to sip his tea, his face cold and a faraway look in his eyes. His face began to morph slightly, no longer the deadly face of an inhuman creature. He had the handsome but haughty face of a young man. He had dark hair, high, strong cheekbones, a slim but strong jaw, and a large bony nose. The features were like shadows though, shifting and indistinct. The jaw would be square one moment, slightly rounder the next. The nose seemed to change size and shape constantly. The only thing that remained steady were the sharp, high cheekbones, and deep-set eyes. I realized that what I was seeing was his clearest memory of what he had looked like as a young man. The face no longer belonged to him though, and he was unable to hold it in place for very long. His face morphed back into whatever it was he had become. I left. I traveled for a long time and had many adventures much like the three of you, and none of it was enough. Until one day I found a man, living alone amongst the desecrated remains of a large village. His face shifted again, this time to an older man, Ugly scars and lines cut deep through his face, and there was a coldness to his dark leathery skin that made me feel sick. Where the younger man had been haughty, with the eyes of a warrior, this man was shifty, vengeful, and weak in the kind of way that turns people evil. This face to look drawn on the creature though. The quality seemed indistinct, reminding me of Halloween masks. The details were clear enough, but there was nothing human behind those eyes. Clearly something had happened, and I told him I would avenge whatever tragedy had befallen his land. But before I could finish speaking, he took the pelt from his back and brought it over his face, transforming into an animal you would no longer have a name for. He leapt at me, and I fought as best as I could. Finally, after a long fight, we separated, both too exhausted to continue, and I begged him to teach me what he had just done. He agreed, and I spent many years under his college. He stopped, looking at us for a long time. You have no desire to know what all that entailed, and I swore to myself I would teach no one. And I perfected the art forms he taught me. I completed the rituals, and became even stronger than him. In the process, I discovered what had befallen his people. He killed them, every man, woman, and child. He killed them, skinned the strongest of them, and ate them. I felt a pit forming in my stomach. He spoke the words as though he was simply describing the night sky. Factual. Emotionals is. He continued. When I discovered this truth, I knew what I had to do. When I had become strong enough, I killed him and made his skin one of my first pelts. He obsessively touched one of the leathery skins on his back. I ate of his flesh and began my journey back to my home as a hero. At first that was how I was greeted. But all powers must be fed, and this power I had obtained demanded a very specific type of nourishment. After a time, I killed the leader of my people and ate of his flesh as well. At first, I merely took his form, and I was soon found out. His children knew I was not in my true form, so I ate them as well. Children can often see beyond the veil. The warning cry of a child is not to be ignored. As the years passed, my true form began to change. I could no longer wear my own face, lest the people who knew me see what I had become. The face he had once called his own hovered for a moment before melting back into the monster. Shrupar frightens many, and most are not equipped to see it. Slowly the years passed, and by the end of it, not even one of my people was left. As my form changed, so did my desires and needs. I left to live in the wilderness amongst the beasts and other ancient ones. I have seen civilizations rise and fall. I have watched the earth change from almost as drastically as my own flesh. Most of the other ancients have fallen, and humanity has grown comfortable in the lands they once knew did not welcome them. Brushing the salt and ash away with his hand. You believe in so many things to protect you, but truly, children, what can plants and minerals do against power? We all froze. The imaginary safety of our boundary line was gone. Silence fell on our group. He smiled and tapped my sketchbook with one finger. Before I allow you to go, I would very much like to keep your book of ancients, child. Without thinking, I shook my head no, and he sighed. As I expected, alas, your hands will fall to the earth one day, and I will wait until then to claim it from you. In the meantime, I expect you to fill the empty pages for me. He stood and stepped back, then pointed to Theo's axe. You had the right idea, you know. Though only severing my head and piercing my heart with the ash could have saved you, and I doubt you could have managed that before I could overtake you. Theo spoke up. Why didn't you kill us too? The creature grinned. It amused me not to. And besides, sage in the blood tastes terrible. And with that he was gone. It was still dark, and even though we knew the boundaries we'd drawn were meaningless, we stayed huddled around the fire until well after sunrise.